Howdy of you delicious people, I am here today to talk about Cobra Kai, Season Trace, Season 3, Season more than 2 number. So, going into this bad boy, going into this Cobra Kai, justifiably I call it a bad boy just because this is what happens when you take something that was really good and then you slap Netflix on it. So what happens... Oh man, this season so far is not that good as the first two. And I was consistently thinking that I'm like, yeah, these seasons are steadily like really, really good. I think that now in this season there is too much going on, but too much of that going on is nothing that is justifiably good. Sadly enough, we have it to where it seems that within these first 5 seasons, we are really scraping at the bottom of the barrel for the Karate Kid franchise. Hey guys, hey, you guys remember the third Karate Kid movie? No? Well, here you go. You don't remember that third Karate Kid movie? No, I don't. Yeah, I remember. I remember the third Karate Kid movie. I've seen the third Karate Kid movie, but that doesn't mean that everyone else did. Yeah, but reasonably, man of the... I kind of like that they are using things from the actual movie to actually help us create story in this movie or in this show. I think that is good. I think that is much better than just recycling footage over and over and over and over again about Johnny Lawrence being defeated by Danny LaRusso through the karate tournament, because they used that a crap ton in the show. Where it's like every single time you have to use like the same stock footage of the crane kick, Johnny getting defeated, and you would have to use that stuff all the time. I like how the footage that it seems that they are using is to help us with the story. And so I guess I can appreciate the flashbacks of that much more so than... when and before, like, it would just consistently be the same, like, yeah, we gotta let you know that Daniel LaRusso crane kicked Johnny for the 80th time, and I thought that those footages being past used was really annoying to me. I did kind of like, in the very early season, like, the very first season, we had, like, Johnny who... was trying to relive his past and feeling very defeated and stuff like that. But again, I honestly feel like this season is kind of turning into like grabbing whatever we can out of that Karate Kid well and kind of just water it for all it's worth or milk it for all it's worth. It feels like Karate Kid is a cow that has been that has seen too many milkins and is at some point where the milk is just going to run out. And that's kind of blatantly obvious within this season. It feels like there is a lot of stretching within the season. There's a lot of... If you have to have Miguel actually literally be stretched out. Because he has therapy. But yeah, every single portion of the show is stretched out, and yeah, I get it. I can understand how they didn't quite know how to be able to do this season just because of the new normal, let's just say. But when also looking at this show, I wouldn't come on here and say, like, yeah, you desperately needed even more fighting. You needed more karate. You needed more kick-A times in this show. No. Just tell a really good story, and it doesn't matter, like, it doesn't matter the action part. But really when you start to whittle the action part down, like, I'm starting to realize how flimsy the stories really are now. I'm starting to realize how flimsy things are in this show. And that's what really sucks. It's like, man, so without the karate, they kind of don't have much of anything left in the show to give you as far as good quality story. Which I was just kind of like, I was just kind of godsmacked about that. I was like, wow, like, because really, yeah, there's so much going on in here, and they think that there's so much going on, but really, to me, there's not enough of that stuff that is going on. And plus, I really don't care about the stuff that is going on. If anything, really, there is so much about this show that feels much more reminiscent of so many other things that I've seen now. Because ultimately, I feel like this season to me kind of reminds me of the show OC, like reasonably. Like I'm just waiting for Miguel or some other character to write a comic book right now and ultimately be just like the OC, because that's what I'm assuming that, like, to me that's what this show is. It's kind of turned into every other show, and they just have a Karate Kid element of pulling back from a movie franchise. That's ultimately kind of what I felt this season was. There is just something about when you slap a Netflix logo on something, just kind of just doesn't make it as good. Yeah, there's money that is shoved into it, but that doesn't make a better show. It doesn't. But anyways, I'm going to ultimately also say that it feels like they kind of are, like they kind of are really stretching out things. I'm so upset that they, like, man, they, like, they're stretching stories out. They're stretching all kinds of things, and reasonably, it was just like when 5 episodes were up, I'm like, man, how are they gonna wrap up this show and give a good enough season finale to where I'm going to care? I I'm kind of godsmacked about that, because I'm feeling like this is just like, hey guys, we're just letting you guys know that we're gonna, like, really turn back time to showcase these Karate Kid movies, and we're gonna bring back these actresses or actors that you remember from those Karate Kid films, and that's what we're gonna do. And I'm like, yeah. So really, we're obviously we're probably gonna play the whoop. I almost dropped the phone. So we're gonna probably play the first half exactly like we did the second half. Is what I'm naturally assuming is what's going to happen. Because ultimately, since Danny found his story, now in the second half of this, Johnny's gonna probably have to find his story, if you know what I mean. And if you don't, I'll have to explain that in spoilers, because evidently Danny has to go on his solo mission to be able to find his story. Let's just say that, or his third movie franchise thingamajigger within this film, or within this show. Anyways, so kind of really, man, are they pushing Hawk in the show? If they didn't push Hawk in the show before, man, are they doing it even more so, to the point where you're kind of like, I'm kind of confused where Hawk is going to, like, is he still 100% like full villain, or is he going to start seeing the era of his ways, or is he like what is the word? relishing in the fact that he seems to be the star of this season for the Cobra Kai side. Because Miguel is just kind of off and off, just kind of barely being relevant. We kind of have Samantha LaRusso, who is kind of just. She's kind of there, but I don't really care. We have Robbie, who is kind of a thing in this show, but again, I'm just like, he's basically the OC character of this show now. That's great. Sure. Dimitri is still a character in the show that ultimately he says lines, but I don't really care. If anything, it seems like they did incorporate some side characters that ultimately I guess I could get behind and be like, oh, cool, yeah, I saw him from the last season, and good thing that he's still in this season. But it also seems like every single season they have to, for the Cobra Kai side, they have to like add new actors in here. Like you could kind of blatantly tell that reasonably there's a lot of people that are like, oh no, yeah, I'm out. Like I'm not gonna be in this season. And so reasonably you have to like add in a bunch of extras who are all gonna be wearing karate dogi and whatever for this season. Like it's blatantly obvious now that it's like, well, like all these people eventually are gonna probably last a season, and then you're probably gonna replace them with somebody else. And I'm assuming at some point that any number of these actors will age themselves out to just be too old to be in high school or be in a karate class. Anyways, I don't know. We'll see. We'll ultimately see. Uh, like age themselves out for karate. I don't know, but reasonably, yeah. It's just we'll see how this story goes. So let's go into that double five to spoil time this show. Because ultimately it's just talking about the first 5 episodes. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this show. Because ultimately, this season just kind of felt like, for the most point, just kind of deflating and kind of defeating to me. It was kind of just like, I get it, new normal, and so it's hard to write this show, but still, like, again, to me, the action I did not give a crap about the action parts. I was like, give me a better story in this season, and instead, they didn't. So it's just like, God, man, are they stretching these episodes? You could just taste the stretch. So let's talk about it. So, reasonably within these first 5 episodes, the real whole thing is, hey, yeah, Miguel is in a coma, and he's also in this weird get-up apparatus, which is kind of weird because here's the thing. So, he's in this weird headgear apparatus thing, but ultimately his legs don't work. Because ultimately they keep showing repetitiously him falling down these or falling and hitting his back onto this stairwell thing. They have to repetitiously use that in the show every single time. It's like a trauma moment where every single person in this show is affected by Miguel falling down the stairs and going, my back, and or spine. I'm hurt. I'm Miguel and I'm hurt. Everybody, remember me. Remember me. Because ultimately you're going to be seeing this scene a lot in these first 5 episodes of Miguel just falling down the stairs. Everybody has to remember it. Samantha has to remember that Miguel fell down the stairs, and oh my god, everybody has to remember it. I can't wait till everyone else has to walk up those flight of stairs to remember that Miguel fell down them, because ultimately that's what everybody has to do in this show. Remember that one scene, because it freaking comes up so freaking often. So, anyways, we go on to here, and reasonably, we have to where seemingly Miguel is ultimately, for a bulk of the very first episode, unconscious. It seems that Johnny is ultimately kind of on the mend again. He's bearding it up, and he's also bearding it up because ultimately he is just distraught about Miguel being in the coma for seemingly 2 weeks. So ultimately, like, we have Johnny who seems to have months worth of beard, but like Miguel has been in a coma for supposedly 2 weeks, and a lot of people are probably telling him that, like, hey man, I'm not a doctor, but I think that Miguel guy, he's dead. Like, some cop is walking in, some guy is switching some channel on the telly at the bar and telling him, like, I think that coma kid is dead. Like, I wasn't really watching the news or anything at all, but I think that coma kid, yeah, that kid's dead. I wasn't really watching any of this news thing because I was too busy speaking to my compadre and going to switch the channel to baseball because we were wanting to both watch baseball. But if anything, I heard every single thing that I was going on that news about that coma kid, because ultimately I knew it would affect you, Johnny. So we have to where Johnny ultimately picks a fight with this big old guy in this bar because Johnny just can't let things go. He can't let it go that a man went and grabbed a remote in a bar and changed the channel on TV. So Johnny has to go and break this guy's car window and ultimately drag him out of his car for Johnny to just get beaten the crap out of. And ultimately, he got beaten the crap out of. And he wanted to see Miguel, so Johnny has to beat himself even more so up to ultimately garner Johnny seeing Miguel to ultimately just be like, hey, Miguel, I hope you wake out of this coma. So we also have a story going on within this story besides Miguel, even though it seems like Miguel is seemingly... Man, do we have a lot of things about Miguel in these first 5 episodes. So, even though reasonably he's a person that's hurt, so reasonably, where is this story there? Where is the real truth? It should have been Johnny and Robbie, honestly, through the beginning of this season, to just finally cement that, like, Johnny really does care. But I guess it's like, oh no, he's still gonna pick Miguel over... Like, dude, Miguel was in a coma, and Johnny spent more time with Miguel than he did with his son that was actually awake, Robbie. Isn't that great? Because ultimately we have in the very beginning of this show, we have LaRusso ultimately seemingly... We find out that it seems that his car company is ultimately going down the toilet. It's going down the toilet. Because ultimately the Russo is like, you know what, I've been spending way too much time at the karate dogi and my karate classes, and all of my kids are now fighting, and I'm trying to go to this PTA meeting, or this meeting with these school people, and all the school people are telling me that my daughter beat up somebody, or that ultimately I'm a bully, or ultimately that I'm a schmuck, or ultimately they're saying all kinds of crap at me. And then all of a sudden, nobody wants to buy my cars anymore. Well, I guess now I have to just find where Robbie is instead of get my car business back to where it's supposed to be. I gotta find where Robbie is. Um, because yeah, like there's nobody buying cars in LaRusso's thing, and ultimately they have to switch gears and ultimately stop talking about chopping down prices and kicking the competition because ultimately the school is trying to have a much more non-violent policy, which ultimately they do questionable violence in a soccer field anyways. But it's soccer. You gotta kick a lot. But anyways, so yeah, but where Daniel only his concern is Robbie. If only Johnny could have that same concern, that would be really great. But again, just uh, Johnny is always all up in that Miguel, and ultimately like trying to get Miguel to ultimately come back from his coma. And I guess that's a good thing too. It's a lot of one person talking and another person's just sleeping, or a lot of one person is just kind of like, hey, yeah, let's show every little bit of progress that Miguel is going to make through this procedure, through these surgeries, and through all this stuff that he needs to do once he wakes up by the end of episode 1 in this season. Because really, we don't have Miguel reasonably and or rationally have people like come into his life that is going to continue a feud or continue anything from very much of any past season. It's just like, oh, okay, Miguel is here to just focus on his treatments or his surgeries or his whatevers, and there isn't going to be much of any real dialogue tying us from past seasons. It's just whatever Miguel is doing now. Um, we ultimately find out that eventually once. Okay, so let's go into the Danielson Robbie thing, and then we'll come back to Miguel because there's so much going on in these 5 episodes. There's so much to tell. So we have Daniel that ultimately we find out that Daniel notices that Robbie has ran to the village, ran somewhere, and ultimately taken one of his prized possessions in his car dealership, a whole van. And so, because ultimately, like, Daniel is trying to desperately try to figure out where Robbie could be. He's kind of going through all the places that reasonably and or rationally Robbie could have gone to the point where he's even going to his dojo and seeing his daughter, and he's actually talking to her. Wow, isn't that amazing? He's actually being a dad, barely. Because we ultimately have Sam who goes back to school, but then leaves school and gets some In-N-Out burger because again, they had to keep playing back to her the scene where Miguel was falling down the stairs repetitiously, and she was remembering that moment in her head repetitiously through the montaging of them having to consistently show it while she was touching the flight of stairs, just going, oh my god, is this where Miguel fell? I don't remember. This must be it. But then also, like, we have it to where Samantha is in turmoil because ultimately she has scrape marks from the knuckle brass knuckle thing that had the she has scars on her arm, and ultimately, like, she's like, oh no, I can't show my scars to everybody. But then ultimately she's like, man, I'm gonna just take off my band-aid and just, like, I'm gonna look cool. Because scars are cool, because why wouldn't they be? And so Daniel's son is really going to have to comfort his daughter, but not really do the greatest job of it because ultimately he's evidently not the mother that is supposed to comfort Samantha better? Because ultimately, like, Samantha's whole thing is like, well, I'm sorry, Dad, but you don't know the good enough difference because you're not a, like, because you're not a woman. And I'm like, so what? He's a person. You're a person. Who cares? At least he's freaking there for you, Samantha. At least he's actually there. He hasn't done jack crap nothing for you. And I don't know how long through any portions of this show besides teach you karate. Give him this point for once. Anyways, pushing on. So Daniel is looking around for this guy named Robbie that ultimately is full on like, dude, I ultimately gotta be in disguise, so I gotta cut my hair and then wear a hoodie because I gotta look all cool and all like OC California, here we come back from where we started from, California. Yeah, because ultimately Robbie is a white tank top away from looking just like Brian McAfee or Brian, the guy who ultimately was from the OC. Basically, he has the exact same hairstyle. Again, he's missing the white tank top and ultimately the necklace that uh, Ryan used to wear on that show. So we have it to where Robbie is seemingly like at the bottom of the barrel of like somebody stole his ride. At some point, we have Daniel that ultimately is trying to track down the GPS of the van, but ultimately Robbie's too smart for that because ultimately he he ripped off the GPS on the tracker, and so ultimately Daniel is just looking through all these places and wasting time. Oh, what a great milking this is. So eventually we get down to Daniel eventually having to go and ask Johnny, hey, you want to actually find your son? You actually want to be a dad today? And Johnny's like, yeah, I feel like I can be a dad today. A real legitimate dad. Like, I think I should probably do that. And so recently, we have it to where Daniel and Johnny end up going to a rehabilitation place to ultimately find Robbie's mother. And ultimately, evidently, Daniel is forking over the dollarinos to have Robbie's mother go into rehab. Which, good for her. So, and good for Daniel because he's a nice guy. But then realizing, like, dude, your car company's going to the crapper. Like, where are you gonna have all this juicy, delicious money coming all from? I don't know. As well as I'm very confused. Does Johnny have a job in this movie or in this show this season? Where is he getting money for rent and everything from? Is he getting some money uh from reasonably the other, like, is he just getting like Cobra Kai money coming from somewhere from Kreese? And I'll get to Kreese in a little bit later. They also have to have a Kreese flashback story. Okay, I didn't understand what that had anything to do with current modern time Kreese. It did nothing. As per usual, as anything would normally do. That flashback didn't really help us tie into anything with, like, man, they need to take some real cues from, like, Arrow when it comes to, like, having a flashback tie into what is going on in the story currently, because it just felt like this flashback was just there to be a thing, and it didn't make sense to me to help me figure out why I should have cared about the Kreese flashback. That was stupid. But anyways, tying back into the search for Robbie. So, reasonably we have it to where the dynamic duo of Daniel and Johnny, to ultimately they are in a car and ultimately they have to be at odds with one another. We have Johnny who's eating corn nuts or something, ultimately being a little pig and kind of tossing them up. Like, I'm eating them. I'm enjoying these corn nuts. And Daniel's like, don't ruin my upholstery of my car, because I'm a car dealer, and so I need my car nice and neat. And Johnny's being a little bit of a slob and just kind of like, I'm eating corn nuts. Who cares about any of this stuff? Why do they have to spend so much time of this? And then also to lead us to this whole entire journey of the finding of Robbie, because Johnny and Daniel had to go to find Robbie's cohorts, his previous cohorts from seasons past, and ultimately have them give some backstory about Robbie, what Robbie would do to ultimately try to make a few dollarinos. So we end up having Johnny and Daniel going into trying to find Robbie and eventually fighting their way through a bunch of people. And then Johnny and Daniel almost fight themselves. They beat themselves up. They fight one another. Really saying that there's no way that these two could ever really truly be friends. Even though, like, this moment when Daniel and Johnny, like, are fighting all these guys off, I'm like, man, this is like Double Dragon. Like, woo, yeah. And then ultimately they fight one another. I'm like, oh, of course, they can never be friends. It can just never happen when they're just copacetic ever. But that'll lead us to the stories that go further on into this episode, or into these 5 episodes. So ultimately we have it to where we find Robbie, and ultimately Robbie is at the rehabilitation place of which his mother is. If only they would have just stuck around in that rehabilitation place until Robbie was to show up. So ultimately Daniel ends up finding Robbie at this rehabilitation place and ultimately has him be under arrest. And so ultimately Robbie ends up being under arrest, and now he's going California. He's going in juvie, or what would be the equivalent to the juvie. Because reasonably and quickly within this show, he's doing community service so that way he can kind of minimize his sentence already. Sure. All right. And we very much have to have the very cliche Robbie being in prison and consistently getting in a fight with somebody that is way bigger than he is, because of course you always have to do that in a show, where it's like, oh, well, this guy is just going to outpower Robbie and fling him around. And you always have to have the big bully guy in prison that is going to just humiliate all the other people and establish dominance and whatever in this prison. And then Robbie has to be the kind of the guy that like is like turning around and is like, what? How dare you do violent things in prison? How dare you? You would think Robbie would just be like, dude, I'm not going to look at anybody. I'm just going to do my time and get out of here. Because at least I didn't murder anybody or get anything for a long, huge amount of stretch of sentence. But anyways, so we have Robbie who is in the prison. And so reasonably, we have it to where Johnny does a whole time visit to see his son. But coincidentally, that is going to be the one day that is tied to Miguel's surgery, because what happens is that we have Samantha trying to make a car wash, uh, making friends with seemingly the cheerleader that is in this school to try to put on some car wash for Miguel to ultimately help him get money for this surgery. Because they find out that ultimately he's going to need surgery, and so ultimately they're like, "Hey, let's put a car wash on." But it seems that really Hawk ultimately blames, or L. Hawk Mauskowitz, uh, or Eli Hawk Mauskowitz, um, Eli, um, Hawk. Anyways, we have to where Hawk is ultimately being the stubborn person that doesn't like any of Miyagi Do, and ultimately he is not trying to be very violent, because ultimately this is a show that can't be violent, and so reasonably he's just really upset that they're trying to do anything that he doesn't like. To where ultimately we have it to where Samantha and them are putting together some car wash to ultimately with seemingly cheerleaders in it, and woohoo! But yeah, there's some guy that's like, yeah, I want the cheerleaders to wash my car, and then ultimately you have the big blubbering guy that's like, yeah, I'm gonna wash your car, because of course you would. But anyways, so we get here, and ultimately we have the kid, the smallest kid in this Miyagi Do, that ultimately is gonna hold on to the dough, the money, the dollarinos. I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like, this kid is just gonna get beaten up because he's the smallest kid. Like, you wouldn't have the big muscular guy holding on to the cash, like normally you would for like wrestling. Like, you'd have some like big, huge, muscular guy like Dave Batista, like holding on to D'Lo Brown, or D'Lo Brown, Devon Dudley's cash. No, you would just have the smallest kid who's holding on to the cash. To ultimately, you just have maybe one, maybe two Cobra Kai members. They're just gonna beat the living crap out of this kid. Ultimately, take all of his lunch money, because isn't that the classic trope? And but in this case, the car wash money. And so reasonably, we have it to where uh, Samantha and the gaggle of kids all have to have payback. So we also have it at some point where Hawk ends up going, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna go and do some soccer today at school." And so reasonably, Samantha's like, yeah, well, I want to beat the crap out of these guys in soccer. So we're gonna make it seem like we're playing normal soccer, but we're gonna dip in a little bit of karate. Here's my thing. You would never in soccer, when you're in gym, have knee pads on, or any kind of padding like thigh pads or whatever, uh, for soccer. You could probably have knee high socks, but you wouldn't have actual soccer padding for soccer in gym. Like, this isn't legit. Like, it doesn't feel like a legitimate soccer. Like, it doesn't feel like they're actually legitimately playing soccer. They're just doing it for gym. And I've never seen it in my life where they actually have soccer padding on. I guess this must be a rich school that ultimately can just afford all this like needless padding for every single one of their students. Like, hey guys, you're playing soccer today? Well, you guys need soccer padding. Oh, hey, you guys, we're gonna play football today? Yeah, we're gonna give you guys all football padding. Hey guys, you're gonna play baseball today? Well, sucks to be you, because we don't have any kind of padding for that. We're not even gonna give you metal helmets. It's like, if you get smacked in the head with ball, sucks to be you. Walk it off, you lazy piece of Not in this school. No. Like, yeah, we didn't get that kind of padding in school. What kind of silly Nancy's are these people? Freaking, like, if you're gonna get hit in the shins or whatever, walk it off, you P word. Who cares? You, like, don't be wearing soccer padding. Are you freaking kidding me? You wusses. Uh, anyways, so, but we get some cool action moments where we get, like, freaking Samantha, like, freaking, like, smacking the one guy with her leg. That little kick move I thought was kind of cool. We get it to where Dimitri trips Hawk and makes him fall on his face. Like, oh, I fell on my face. I'm the villain in this season. Because ultimately, Kreese is just with his towel, and he's like, yeah, I have a towel. And I'm the villain. I'm going to consistently have people come into my dojo, and I'm going to tell them, hey, yeah, guys, it's closed. Freaking lock the door. After the first time somebody just walks in there, lock the effing door. He's just like having everybody walk in. You just have like Daniel walking in to meet Kreese, and ultimately talking about old times where it's like, yeah, like if only I could see the face of that old man now. Daniel, looking at you like a schmuck. Just if only I could see that old man right now and just lick him one. If only I could just beat him. Because ultimately Cobra Kai is so successful now, Daniel. What are you going to do about that, Daniel? Ultimately, like, Daniel is almost wanting to fight Kreese, and he's like, yeah, fight me. Me and Johnny are gonna beat you. Johnny's not even he's not even one lick in this class. He's never shown up in this entire half of the season. He doesn't even join one class of the Cobra Kai because he's too busy with Miguel or Robbie, or ultimately going to a church to ultimately run into his old crony from Cobra Kai, to ultimately make that priest guy ultimately just like, yeah, where are you going to get money for Miguel's procedure? You're probably going to have to steal some money from your old pop, your old dad, your old stepdad that ultimately is going to bizarrely going to give you money now, which makes no sense. But hopefully that works out for you. Because ultimately we have Johnny that is desperately looking for money. I'm transitioning now from all these tangent scenes that I ultimately talked about. Johnny goes and tries to make qualms with his old pop, his stepfather that never really seemed all that quite good at being a good quality dad, I guess. Because ultimately this guy was just there for him. Because ultimately the real qualm when ultimately Johnny goes to his step-pop is that ultimately his stepfather mentions like, well, hey, I was there. Your father, your biological father just left you. But ultimately, I'm just going to treat you like crap because ultimately whenever you've asked for money and stuff, I've just handed it over. You know what? Like, at some point, Johnny could ultimately just be like, yeah, I want to be good to my stepdad to the point of him just feeling awful that he gives me all this crap, all this grief. But again, like, Johnny's not really quite, like, cleaning up his act yet. So, like, it's been 3 seasons and the dude still hasn't really completely cleaned up his act because ultimately his stepdad is just like, well, did your business fall under? Because I knew it would. Because you're a schmuck. So Johnny ultimately tries to ask for money, dollarinos, buckaroos, from his stepdad, and his stepdad is just like, you know what, I'm just going to continue giving you grief, for any time that you're ever going to ask me for money, so don't even bother. But Johnny just ends up stealing some sculpture from his father anyways to pay for this bill. And you would have thought that his stepdad would have been like, my son's a thief! I'm arresting this man! But man, does that never come up. Maybe at the tail end of this season, we'll find out that Johnny is going to go to jail. And that's how this season is going to end, with finally his stepfather saying, yeah, I'm going to arrest you for stealing my sculpture, my great and amazing sculpture that I desperately want back for reasons. Anyways, pushing on. So we ultimately have it to where Miguel is doing his procedure, but again, it's on the day of which Robbie is ultimately going to see a visit from his pop-pop, because Johnny, again, could have scheduled any day to see his biological son, but instead, he wanted to see his unbiological son get his procedure done and seemingly have some time praying for that procedure to go well. All while also we have flashbacks going on of John Kreese, which I ultimately did not care about. Because I'm like, what are these flashbacks going to do for me? They're going to do a boatload of nothing. And so I don't even want to talk about what they are. Because ultimately we are to assume at first that that Kreese is some jock-looking character, but instead he's a guy that is working his way up through some diner as some dishwasher. And so ultimately we're just like led to believe that John or Kreese ultimately was like a good guy at some point, but then maybe the military turned him evil, I guess? I don't know. That seems like a weird thing to ultimately suggest, because ultimately the military doesn't do stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe there's more flashbacks of Kreese that ultimately will show why he turned so villainous for reasons we don't understand. Because ultimately, when we have seemingly... and here's the thing that I honestly really hated about this season. So we have it to where ultimately Tori honestly was the big bad in the last season. But in this season, we have to feel sympathetic about her. We have to find out that her mother is in a bad way and that ultimately she has to pay all kinds of rent and all kinds of stuff. Like, her mother is really sick, and ultimately, like, she may or may not be doing things, Tori, with her super. There are some questionable things that she is doing with her super that ultimately kind of seems unsaid for reasons I don't understand. There's always, like, Tori is consistently looking over at her super, just kind of going like, things are happening, but I can't tell you what they are. Looking over at her super, and I'm confused. To her ultimately, we have Kreese, who ultimately has to come knocking at Tori's door, ultimately saying, like, hey, why aren't you in the dojo? Why aren't you, like, kicking all kinds of butt in my karate dojo? Because I know you can. But so we have to her Tori is just, like, again, looking at her super and just going, like, yeah, I have to work and take care of my sick mother, and everyone has to feel sympathetic for me. Cue the violins for Tori. Because this person came off as such a strong character, but then all of a sudden we now have to debunk the strong character into now feeling sad for her. You just ruined this character for me. Like, reasonably, like, you could have given her a way better story than this, I think. Like, I don't know. I don't think like you could have had it to where this girl is like you could have had her been this person that like her life was really going so horrible to where like maybe she was getting uh like maybe like she had such a horrible life that reasonably like her anger like she has unlimited anger to where ultimately like she's just gonna erupt or explode at some point because her life is so horrible. Like no, but instead I have to feel sad for her and sympathize with a person that I don't want to sympathize with because knowing full well like I don't want to know the story of her story, but now I have to hear it, and I'm like, I don't like this. But ultimately, we have Kreese, who ultimately puts a number on Tori's super to ultimately make a deal. But anyways, so we ultimately have Tori who goes into the dojo to ultimately tell Kreese it's like, hey, yeah, you know all of my problems? They're all gone now. Great for me, right? Because we have to wrap her story up in one bottled episode, I guess, because there's so much elsewhere going on. So, I didn't like that episode at all. It was stupid. But anyways, pushing on to more Miguel. God. So, we have seemingly Daniel is having his car company in hot water, and you have to have a whole entire episode where seemingly Daniel is ultimately going to have to now go to Tokyo, Japan to ultimately make it to our Doyona, whichever. Uh, Ultimately, it seems that ultimately they're going to lose all the Japanese cars in this dealership because there's some other dealership that is trying to buy all the rights or whatever for using cars, certain specific Japanese cars in his dealership, which I'm like, who cares? But okay, whichever. Um, but anyways, so we have that Daniel is in such much of a snag that he needs to go to Japan to reasonably get Toyota or whatever to ultimately work with him. But he went all the way to Japan just for Japan to just tell him it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but like this stuff isn't quite gonna work out, and sucks to be you. Like, dude, you could have Skyped us, you could have Zoomed. You didn't have to come all the way out here for no reason. Uh, but hey, like, if you have the billions upon billions of money that you have, because good God, how many things has Daniel done in this show that ultimately is like, hey, yeah, I'll cover that. Oh, sure, I'll cover all of this. Yeah, cover everything because I just have billions and billions of dollars flowing out of my butt to where it's like, why do I even need a car dealership? I don't even know. So we ultimately have Daniel going off to Japan, and ultimately let's finish with Miguel and his harrowing journey of surgery, which still leaves him without being able to move his legs. To ultimately, like, we just have Johnny who is sneaking in repetitiously to see Miguel to ultimately push him to ultimately have his legs be working, and to where we just have Miguel, who ultimately is desperately wanting a little touch of his phone, and Johnny is pushing his phone away from Miguel for Miguel to now have to get out of his bed, and he flops out of his bed, and ultimately Johnny's like, oh, well, that sucks. But ultimately, like, Johnny is repetitiously pushing Miguel to be better and to try to walk again, and so on and so forth, because ultimately Miguel is ultimately just like, well, will I be able to do karate again? And we have it to where the doctor's like, I wouldn't go that far, kid. And like, you still got ways to go. You still got 3 seasons to be able to completely walk and kick people again. Like, so, because we're gonna milk this bad boy out, if you know what I mean. We're really gonna milk out this story. So we ultimately have it to where seemingly Miguel goes to a rock concert with Dee Snider, which all of a sudden triggers Miguel to be able to move his foot to the beats, to the rhythms, because ultimately Dean Snyder's music is so seductive that ultimately you would have to just magically be able to now move your feet to the beat of the Dean Snyder. Because ultimately music does magical things. Um, so ultimately, while again, Johnny and Miguel ultimately sneak their way into some concert because that makes sense. Ultimately, the guy that is the bouncer at this concert is not looking for any tickets. Is just saying, "Oh, you need to be 21 to be going into this concert." And I'm like, "What?" They're not serving beer at this concert. And why does he need to be 21? I'm confused. It's not like you're gonna have what are the women just gonna like? Is it a is this like a strip club concert? I don't I don't quite grasp it. I don't get the 21 of it. Like I would assess it'd be 18, and this guy is supposedly 17. And so, I just don't get it. Anyways, it's stupid. Anyways, so reasonably going on into here, we have the concert that ultimately triggers Miguel moving his foot again. And I'm just like, sure, this seems like such a stupid story that, okay, you have to incorporate the magic of music, I guess. Or maybe just hot women that ultimately Miguel is gawking over. That ultimately is like, oh yeah, now I'm going to move my foot because beautiful women. Anyways, moving on from that story. So ultimately, if that isn't weird enough, we now have to have um, uh, we have to have Daniel eventually go to Japan and go to Osaka, where he has to rekindle his relationship with girl number 3 of Karate Kid. Uh, Ultimately, having us to re-cement the relationship of the girl from Karate Kid 3. Ultimately, when Daniel was in Japan, and ultimately now he has to ultimately have some significant moments with the girl from Karate Kid 3, which ultimately I don't know what her name is. Yikes. I don't remember what her name is. I don't. Kumiko? Kumiko? Probably pronouncing that wrong. Um, and so we have it to where ultimately Daniel is going back to the place of which that he remembers Kumiko being at, and ultimately this place is much different than what he assesses. That ultimately all of a sudden it's a strip mall or something like that. We ultimately have Kumiko who ultimately is dancing at this mall, and so recently Daniel is like, hey, with his eyes, and Kumiko's like, hey, with her eyes, and now they have to play catch up. And ultimately, we find out that Kumiko ultimately never remarried because ultimately, after Daniel had fought to the death for her, because Daniel was her knight in shining armor, evidently she could never find another man that could ultimately equal to that. We ultimately find out that eventually that Daniel is going to try to, or that Kimiko is ultimately going to try to reconnect Daniel with Mr. Miyagi by ultimately getting some letters that ultimately had been found by seemingly Mr. Miyagi's wife or family relative of theirs. Sure. Uh, Ultimately, kind of having us know that Mr. Miyagi had a wife over in Japan, of course, and wrote to her almost every day, and to the point to where we even found like a letter before Mr. Miyagi had died. Uh, Luckily enough to ultimately tell us like a backstory about that Mr. Miyagi had been a grandfather quasi to Samantha, I guess, which was interesting. Um, a lot of that stuff was kind of really interesting to really try and tie Mr. Miyagi into the show, I guess, a little bit more. Like, I didn't kind of mind that stuff. I didn't think that it was cheesy or stupid. I thought it was kind of really interesting to, like an interesting way to like kind of tie a person that no longer can be on the show, like kind of tie them into this a little bit. I kind of hope that there isn't more of that though, because I would kind of start to really get annoyed with that, with them kind of like dredging up every single bit of little past thing that they could tie. Um, like, hey, Mr. Miyagi told me this, and Mr. Miyagi told me that now. And Mr. Miyagi had a friend that ultimately is going to tell me this and that now. But ultimately, Kamiko eventually ties in the villain of Karate Kid episode, or Karate Kid 3. We have to have a really, very much, remembrance of, oh god, where is the guy, where is the person, where is this guy, where is the villainous guy that was in Karate Kid 3 that ultimately was the villain, ultimately is going to seemingly going to be uh sitting next to, I think his name is Chosen. Um, Ultimately, he is going to be uh, sitting with Daniel-san, and ultimately, we find out that Chosen ultimately had felt great shame about losing to Daniel, toward the point where ultimately Chosen is ultimately going to have a fight with Daniel, but it's going to be like a fight for Daniel to learn some of the teaches that Mr. Miyagi did not tell him about. Because ultimately, we're going to have the Chosen ultimately take Daniel to some dojo, and eventually, Chosen is going to beat the crap out of Daniel. To ultimately, there are some hits, I guess some like pressure point hits that kind of numb up Daniel's body parts and like arms and stuff like that, to where ultimately Chosen ultimately goes like this, and ultimately, of course, in the Karate Kid 3, it's like live and die, man, and ultimately he's like die, and he's like wrong, and he bumps his nose. We have it to where the Chosen guy ultimately does that thing to Daniel, and he's like, I've waited years to do that, ha 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 ha. Like, because ultimately just kind of getting back at him for ultimately doing that to him, and ultimately everybody talks about it, and so now this guy is going to do it back to him as a joke. Just like, yeah, I've waited so long to do that. And so reasonably we have it to where ultimately this guy is ultimately going to tell us about his kind of comeback trail, of like, yeah, like I felt ashamed of losing to you, but ultimately I kind of worked through that shame, and but there's always just like reasonably there's always still like something to work past and work through and whatever, and but ultimately we find that the chosen is ultimately seemingly teaching kids karate, which is great. But if anything, we also have seemingly a note that ultimately Chosen had for Daniel, as well as just to basically tell him it's like, hey, those teachings, yeah, I taught you some things. Isn't that great? But now you need to leave. So we basically just push on to seemingly have Daniel eventually seeming to have his time in Japan up. So while that is all going on, we also have it where Johnny is trying to see Robbie by going and getting a meal, like a soup meal or something, because ultimately Robbie is doing some community service to minimize his sentence. And so he's doing that by doing some soup plantation like thing for ultimately the homeless or whatever. And so Johnny goes to see Robbie to just kind of talk to him like, "Oh, you're fighting in prison? Oh, well, what a schmuck you are, because you're fighting in prison." And Robbie's like, "Dude, there is nothing I can do. Like, ma, like, how about you shut up and be my dad?" And so we ultimately have it to where Johnny and Robbie are like Johnny is trying to make amends, but in the end, like it's very hard to win Robbie over because ultimately we have so much time where Robbie is still throwing in Johnny's face that it's like, well, like where were you? Like, dude, you scheduled a time to meet me and you weren't there. Like, if anything, even Kreese came to see me and told me to like strike hard and strike first and just strike everywhere. Um, Kreese went and saw me. Like your priest guy came and saw me, but you didn't until now. So ultimately, like we have Robbie who has so much angst and so much just bitterness that ultimately he's just not gonna let it go to the point where he ultimately accidentally drops some thing of soup. Ultimately, everybody's like, "Soup! It's what's for dinner." And so recently, Robbie is just ashamed that he dropped the soup. So ultimately, he just walks off and walks away. Where everybody's like, somebody's gonna have to clean that up, and it's not gonna be Robbie, evidently. But anyways, so we eventually have Robbie who sees Kreese at the prison, and ultimately Kreese telling him it's like, yeah, use the dark side of the force, Robbie. Turn to the dark side. And so ultimately we have Robbie who ultimately just starts beating up all these guys that were bullying him in prison consistently every single day. And so he beats the crap out of them. But then ultimately he kind of gets overpowered or outnumbered, and so kind of the fight is kind of even, and to where ultimately they all get arrested, but ultimately nobody squeals on anybody. So it kind of is like, all right, sure, fight goes off and whatever, what have you. So we ultimately have it to where Daniel, uh, ultimately is still in Japan. To ultimately he finds out that Kamiko ultimately has a friend that ultimately works in Toyota, and so ultimately this person works in sales for Toyota. So ultimately it seems that Toyota is going to be working with Daniel. So everything is going to seem to work out okay. Because ultimately Daniel was ultimately defiant between this other guy that was trying to buy his company out. And so a reason I guess this is a perfect way of just going like, yeah, like Daniel's gonna work with him and only him because ultimately this girl who works with Toyota ultimately had been saved by Daniel in Karate Kid 3. Like we have to really just tie that movie into just like, yeah, every person that you ever did a thing with in Karate Kid 3, yeah, they're right here to just be like, yeah, you did a good thing there. Good for you. And so, luckily, all this is just panning out, I guess. So, reasonably, like, that is kind of just to me how this kind of, this season really boils down. And I think that's all that I really want to talk about through these first 5 seasons, or first 5 episodes, I mean, of this third season. Really, to me, like, I ultimately, when looking at it, like Johnny is going to now reminisce with the girl from Boys, who ultimately was in the Karate Kid movie as well, and also in Back to the Future and a number of other things. Uh, Hollow Man, she was in that movie, which ultimately I've seen, and ultimately like. Yeah, so Johnny is going on her Facebook and like, yeah, it's that girl that ultimately I had ties with before in previous time. Um, so I'm like, oh great, so the second half is going to be identical to the first half. Great. It's just okay, sure. Whatever you got to do to just kind of stretch this out, but ultimately I'm just kind of okay about some of this stuff. But again, it's also just kind of it's really stretching really out really far. Like I'm just assuming the next 5 episodes are just being Johnny finding this woman and talking to her, and like that's gonna be the next 5 episodes. And like, well, how are they gonna end episode 3 or season 3? Not with a karate tournament. No, they're just gonna end it with them just like having horrible, horrible words, and Johnny's gonna end up in prison, and Miguel is not going to be able to still walk until 8 seasons later, and I don't know. I'm just kind of wishy washy about all this, and so reasonably, I hope we really don't stretch this stuff out, and we really get to a good potential story. The only thing that happened that was good was we had Samantha who fought back with the Cobra Kai, ultimately still leading to Dimitri ending up getting his arm broken because when Tori came in, she's like, "Hey, yeah, Warriors, come out and play, yay!" Ultimately, like Samantha was like, "Oh no, I think I might have a heart attack," because ultimately I'm very scared of Tori because ultimately she had scarred me before, as we have to consistently show repetitiously footages of stuff that happened previously because god dang, can we just not just be afraid of things? No, we have to just milk the footage for all it's worth of previous seasons or previous Karate Kid movies or previous whatever. We just need to milk those footages out for all it's worth. So that's the thing that I'm so irritated about this show for doing. It's to understand and or help us try to figure out what's going on. Why is this person scared because of the past footage? But you're just kind of milking the same footage. Like you have the same 3 things of footage that are used repetitiously. It's like you're kind of queuing up. It's kind of like when YouTubers would have those like sound things that ultimately when they would press a button and be like, "Oh yeah," it'd be like it's like that. Or like when radio stations would be like, "This is 90Q847." W113 or whatever, and like you'd have the in the cloud, like that kind of thing, where you'd have to have like all these bizarrish, weird like sounds that just otherwise tie into the radio station, which never made sense to me. Why they have to have like 12 minutes of them like making all kinds of weird, bizarre sounds that make no sense, and but now we ultimately have like Karate Kid kind of doing the exact same pull where they need to consistently repetitiously use certain things of footage like repetitiously through certain episodes. So I think other than that, I'm just gonna call it a wrap here. Hopefully, this second season is a little bit better than this first, and I could justify all of this. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.